They thought they could steamroll a quiet retiree and steal his property through fake HOA violations. What they didn't know was that while they were filing fraudulent liens against my house, my daughter was already reviewing their case files. From her office at FBI headquarters. Drop a comment below with where you're watching from, because this story of how a corrupt HOA accidentally targeted a federal law enforcement family is absolutely wild. The morning sun was filtering through the oak trees in my backyard when I first saw the bright yellow notice taped to my front door. I was 62 years old, recently retired from 30 years as a high school principal in suburban Denver, and I'd been looking forward to spending my golden years in the beautiful craftsman home my late wife Elena and I had saved for decades to buy. I pulled the notice down, expecting maybe a neighborhood watch update or information about road construction. Instead, I was staring at an official-looking document from something called the Heritage Hills Community Association. The header was printed in bold, authoritative letters that immediately made my stomach clench with anxiety. Final notice. Unpaid Homeowners Association Dues and Violations, it read. Below that, in smaller but equally threatening text, was a list of supposed violations that made my head spin. Unauthorized exterior paint color, non-compliant mailbox design, unapproved landscaping modifications. The total amount due was listed as $14,867. I stood there on my front porch, the morning breeze rustling the notice in my hands, completely bewildered. I had never heard of Heritage Hills Community Association. When Elena and I bought this house 5 years ago, we specifically chose a neighborhood without an HOA because we'd heard horror stories from friends about power-hungry board members and ridiculous rules. Our real estate agent had been very clear about it. This was an established neighborhood from the 1950s, built long before HOAs became common. The houses were individual properties with no community association, no shared amenities, and no monthly fees. That's exactly what we wanted. I walked back inside and sat down at my kitchen table, reading through the notice more carefully. The violations were absurd. My mailbox, a simple black metal post box that had been there when we moved in, was apparently not in compliance with community standards. My front yard flower garden, which Elena had lovingly planned and planted before she passed away 2 years ago, was listed as unauthorized landscaping that disrupts neighborhood aesthetic harmony. Most insulting of all, they claimed my house's exterior paint color was unapproved. The house was painted a classic sage green with white trim, the same colors it had worn for decades. Elena and I had touched up the paint here and there over the years, but we'd never changed the color scheme. I decided to call the number listed on the notice, thinking this had to be some kind of administrative error. Maybe they'd gotten my address confused with someone else's. These things happen, especially when organizations are expanding their territory. A woman answered on the second ring with a voice that was syrupy sweet, but somehow felt fake, like artificial vanilla flavoring. Heritage Hills Community Association. This is Patricia Donovan speaking. How may I assist you today? I explained who I was and that I'd received a notice about unpaid HOA dues and violations. I was polite and reasonable, assuming we could clear this up quickly. Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake. My property isn't part of any homeowners association. When my wife and I purchased this home, we made sure it was outside any HOA jurisdiction. There was a pause, and when Patricia spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly. Still sweet, but with an edge of condescension. Oh, Mr. Martinez, I see. Your file right here on my computer. It appears you're quite significantly behind on your community obligations. I felt my patience beginning to fray. There are no obligations because I'm not a member of your association. I have all the original purchase documents. There was never any mention of an HOA. She made a soft, patronizing sound, like she was dealing with a confused elderly person. Well, sir, our records clearly show that your property was included in our community boundaries following a legal annexation process that was completed 8 weeks ago. I'm sure the paperwork was sent to your address, but don't you worry. I understand how overwhelming these transitions can be. The way she said transitions made it sound like she was talking to someone with dementia. I never received any paperwork about annexation, I said, trying to keep my voice level. That's unfortunate, she replied, and I could practically hear her shrugging through the phone. But the legal process has been completed. The community voted, the proper forms were filed with the county, and your property is now subject to our covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The good news is that we can work out a payment plan for your back dues. I hung up feeling frustrated and confused. Something about this whole situation felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. The woman had sounded so official, so certain about their legal authority. Maybe there really had been some kind of annexation process that I'd missed. That evening, I called my daughter Maria. She was working late at her office in Washington, D.C., as usual. Maria had always been the fighter in our family, the one who never backed down from a challenge. After graduating from law school, she'd joined the FBI and worked her way up to become a supervisory special agent, specializing in white-collar crime. "Dad, you sound stressed," she said as soon as she heard my voice. "What's going on?" I explained the whole situation, the notice, the supposed violations, the phone call with Patricia Donovan. I tried to keep my voice calm, but Maria could always read between the lines when something was bothering me. When I finished, there was a long silence on her end. "Dad," she finally said, and her tone had changed completely. "This sounds like a scam. A sophisticated one, but a scam nonetheless." "But they filed paperwork with the county," I protested. "The woman said there was a legal annexation process. Anyone can file paperwork with the county," Maria replied. "The question is whether it's legitimate. Dad, I want you to do exactly what I tell you, okay? Tomorrow morning, you're going to drive down to the county clerk's office. You're going to ask for a certified copy of the current official plat map for your property. Not just a printout, a certified copy with the official seal." She continued with the methodical precision that had made her successful in federal law enforcement. "While you're there, ask to see any recent filings related to HOA boundary changes in your area. If this annexation really happened, there should be a clear paper trail. And Dad, document everything. Take photos of any papers they show you. Save every email. Record phone calls if your state allows it." "You think this is serious enough for all that?" I asked. "Dad, if someone is using fraudulent documents to claim ownership rights over your property, this isn't just serious. It's federal. Mail fraud, wire fraud, potentially racketeering if it's part of a pattern. I've seen cases like this before. Predatory HOAs that target vulnerable homeowners, usually elderly people, hoping they'll just pay up rather than fight." The word vulnerable stung a little. I didn't think of myself that way, but I realized that's probably exactly how I looked to these people. A widowed retiree living alone in a nice house. Perfect prey. The next morning, I drove to the county administration building downtown. It was one of those imposing concrete structures from the 1970s, all sharp angles and small windows. The U.S. clerk's office was on the second floor, and the woman behind the counter looked like she'd been there since the building opened. "I need a certified copy of the current plat map for this address," I said, sliding a piece of paper with my address written on it across the counter. She typed something into her computer and frowned slightly. That's interesting," she said. "It looks like there have been some recent filings related to this area. Let me pull up the history." She turned her monitor toward me, and I could see a series of entries on the screen. The most recent one was dated exactly 8 weeks ago, just as Patricia Donovan had claimed. But something about it didn't look right. "Can you show me what was filed?" I asked. She clicked a few more buttons and pulled up a document. It was a boundary modification form, claiming that 78 property owners in my neighborhood had voted to join the Heritage Hills Community Association. My address was listed right there among them. "This says I voted in favor of joining," I said, pointing at the screen. "But I never received any notice about a vote. I never voted on anything." The clerk shrugged. I just processed the paperwork, sir. If you have questions about the filing, you'd need to contact the HOA directly or maybe speak with a lawyer. She printed out the certified plat map and handed it to me along with a copy of the annexation filing. The official seal felt heavy in my hands, like a weapon I didn't know how to use yet. When I got home, I called Maria and sent her photos of everything. She called me back an hour later and her voice was tight with controlled anger. "Dad, this filing is suspicious as hell. The signatures all look similar and some of the addresses don't even exist. I ran a few of the names through our databases. 3 of the people who supposedly voted to join this HOA have been dead for over 2 years. What does that mean?" I asked, though I was starting to understand. "It means this Patricia Donovan and her associates have committed several federal crimes. But we need more evidence before we can move. I'm going to make some calls." Over the next week, Heritage Hills Community Association turned up the heat. Every morning brought a new violation notice. My garbage cans were supposedly placed incorrectly on collection day. My driveway needed pressure washing. My hedge was trimmed to an unapproved height. Each notice came with additional fines, and the total kept climbing. Within 7 days, they claimed I owed over $25,000 in back dues and violation penalties. But the financial pressure was just the beginning. On Thursday morning, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. It was from a law firm called Henderson & Associates, claiming to represent Heritage Hills Community Association. The letter informed me that if my account wasn't brought current within 10 days, they would file a lien against my property. A lien. The word sent a chill down my spine. I'd heard about homeowners losing their houses over unpaid HOA dues, even when the amounts were relatively small. The legal system seemed to be set up to favor these associations, giving them almost unchecked power over the people who lived in their communities. That afternoon, I was working in my garden when a pickup truck pulled up across the street. 2 men got out, one carrying a camera with a long telephoto lens. They weren't trying to hide what they were doing. They stood on the public sidewalk and took dozens of photos of my house, my yard, my car in the driveway. I walked over to them, trying to stay calm. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The man with the camera lowered it and smiled at me. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Just documenting violations for the HOA," he said. "Nothing personal." "What violations?" I asked. He gestured vaguely at my house. "We'll let you know," he said, and they got back in their truck and drove away. That evening, those photos appeared on the Heritage Hills Community Association Facebook page. My home was featured in a post titled, "Persistent Violations in Our Community." The comments below were brutal. People I'd never met were calling me selfish and disrespectful. Someone suggested I should be forced to move if I couldn't follow simple community standards. They were trying to isolate me, to turn my neighbors against me. It was psychological warfare designed to make me feel helpless and alone. Over the next week, Heritage Hills Community Association turned up the heat. Every morning brought a new violation notice. My garbage cans were supposedly placed incorrectly on collection day. My driveway needed pressure washing. My hedge was trimmed to an unapproved height. Each notice came with additional fines, and the total kept climbing. Within 7 days, they claimed I owed over $25,000 in back dues and violation penalties. But the financial pressure was just the beginning. On Thursday morning, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. It was from a law firm called Henderson & Associates, claiming to represent Heritage Hills Community Association. The letter informed me that if my account wasn't brought current within 10 days, they would file a lien against my property. A lien. The word sent a chill down my spine. I'd heard about homeowners losing their houses over unpaid HOA dues, even when the amounts were relatively small. The legal system seemed to be set up to favor these associations, giving them almost unchecked power over the people who lived in their communities. That afternoon, I was working in my garden when a pickup truck pulled up across the street. 2 men got out, one carrying a camera with a long telephoto lens. They weren't trying to hide what they were doing. They stood on the public sidewalk and took dozens of photos of my house, my yard, my car in the driveway. I walked over to them, trying to stay calm. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The man with the camera lowered it and smiled at me. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Just documenting violations for the HOA," he said. "Nothing personal." "What violations?" I asked. He gestured vaguely at my house. "We'll let you know," he said, and they got back in their truck and drove away. That evening, those photos appeared on the Heritage Hills Community Association Facebook page. My home was featured in a post titled, "Persistent Violations in Our Community." The comments below were brutal. People I'd never met were calling me selfish and disrespectful. Someone suggested I should be forced to move if I couldn't follow simple community standards. They were trying to isolate me, to turn my neighbors against me. It was psychological warfare designed to make me feel helpless and alone. Saturday morning, I was making coffee when I heard cars pulling into my driveway. I looked out the window and saw two black SUVs with government plates. Maria got out of the first one, looking every inch the federal agent in her dark suit and serious expression. The second SUV disgorged 3 more people I recognized immediately. My son Carlos, who worked as a fraud investigator for the Treasury Department. My nephew David, a U.S. attorney from the Colorado District Office. And someone I didn't recognize, a woman in her 40s with the kind of intense, focused energy that screamed law enforcement. Maria introduced her as Special Agent Jennifer Walsh from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Agent Walsh has been tracking HOA fraud schemes across the western states, Maria explained. When I told her about your situation, she was very interested. They set up a command center in my dining room, spreading documents across the table that Elena and I had used for family dinners for 5 years. Seeing federal agents working at that table felt surreal, like my quiet suburban life had suddenly become the set of a crime drama. Agent Walsh laid out a file thick with reports and photographs. "Mr. Martinez," she said, "your case isn't isolated. We've been investigating Heritage Hills Community Association for 6 months. They're part of what we call a property acquisition scheme. They create fake HOAs, annex properties illegally, then use harassment and fraudulent legal threats to force homeowners to sell." She showed me photographs of other houses, other families who had been targeted. An elderly couple in Lakewood who'd been fined $30,000 for having the wrong kind of porch furniture. A disabled veteran in Aurora, whose service dog was classified as a community disruption, leading to fines that forced him to sell his home. "The pattern is always the same," Agent Walsh continued. "They target people they think won't fight back. Seniors, people living alone, anyone who might be intimidated by official-looking paperwork and legal threats." Carlos, my son, spread out a different set of documents. "But here's what makes this case special, Dad. We've been tracking the money trail. Every property that Heritage Hills has forced into a sale has been purchased by the same shell company, and that company is owned by Patricia Donovan's husband." The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just harassment. It was an organized, criminal conspiracy to steal people's homes using the legal system as a weapon. Agent Walsh outlined their strategy. "We have enough evidence to arrest Patricia Donovan and her associates right now," she said. "But we want the whole network. There are probably dozens of families who have been victimized by this scheme. If we move too early, we might miss the bigger fish." Maria took over the explanation. "We're going to use you as bait, Dad, but you'll be perfectly safe. We're going to make them think their pressure campaign is working, that you're getting desperate. They'll get overconfident and make mistakes." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would call Patricia Donovan and tell her I was considering selling my house rather than continuing to fight the HOA. This would trigger their next phase of the scheme, bringing in their preferred buyers to make a lowball offer. Meanwhile, the FBI would be monitoring all their communications. They already had warrants for Patricia's phone and email accounts, and they'd been building a comprehensive case against the entire operation. "The key," Agent Walsh explained, "is that you never admit any wrongdoing or agree to pay any fines. You're just a tired old man who wants this conflict to end. Let them think they're winning." It felt strange to pretend to be defeated when I actually had the full power of federal law enforcement on my side. But I understood the strategy. Sometimes, you have to let your enemies think they're winning so they'll reveal how far they're willing to go. Monday morning, I called Patricia Donovan's office. When she answered, I put on my best, defeated old man voice. "Ms. Donovan, this is Robert Martinez. I've been thinking about our conversation last week." "Oh yes, Mr. Martinez," she purred, clearly pleased. "I hope you've had time to review your situation and consider your options." "I have," I said, injecting just the right amount of weariness into my voice. "To be honest, this whole thing has been very stressful for me. My wife passed away a couple of years ago, and I just don't have the energy to fight anymore." "I understand completely," she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "These community standards can seem overwhelming at first, but they really do protect everyone's property values. I've been thinking," I continued, "maybe it would be easier if I just sold the house and moved somewhere simpler. Do you know of any realtors who might be able to help me?" The pause on her end was telling. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled, trying not to sound too eager. "Well, as it happens, I do know someone who specializes in properties that have HOA compliance issues. He understands the complexities involved." "That would be wonderful," I said. "Could you have him call me?" "Of course. I'll reach out to him right away. And Mr. Martinez, once you've decided to sell, we can probably work something out regarding those outstanding fines. We're not unreasonable people." The hook was set. Within 2 hours, my phone rang. "Mr. Martinez, this is James Donovan from Premium Property Solutions. I understand you're interested in selling your home." James Donovan, the same last name as Patricia. This was definitely family business. James Donovan arrived at my house the next morning in a luxury sedan and an expensive suit. He was a smooth-talking man in his 40s with perfectly styled hair and a smile that was probably very effective. On desperate homeowners. What he didn't know was that Maria was watching from the house across the street, using high-powered surveillance equipment to record everything. Agent Walsh was parked 2 blocks away in an unmarked van, monitoring their conversation through a wire I was wearing. "Mr. Martinez," James said as he walked through my living room, "I can see why you've grown attached to this place. It's got real character." He was studying my house like a predator sizing up its prey, making notes on a tablet and taking photos. The challenge, of course, is the HOA situation. Properties with compliance issues can be very difficult to sell through traditional channels. I played my part perfectly. "I just want this nightmare to end," I said. "The fines keep growing and I can't afford to fight them anymore." "I completely understand," he said with fake sympathy. "The good news is that I specialize in exactly these situations. I can handle all the HOA complications and take care of the outstanding fines as part of the purchase process." Then came the lowball offer. "Given the compliance issues and the urgency of your situation, I could offer you $220,000 for the property. That's significantly below market value, but it would be a cash sale, and we could close within 2 weeks. $220,000 for a house that Elena and I had bought for $450,000 just 5 years ago. A house that had only increased in value since then. He was offering less than half what it was worth. "I know it's lower than you might have hoped," he continued, "but with the outstanding HOA fines and the potential legal complications, this might be your best option." I told him I needed time to think about it, and he left his business card. As soon as his car was out of sight, Maria came over from her surveillance position. "We got everything," she said with satisfaction. "Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law. Plus, his offer price proves this is a coordinated scheme to artificially depress property values." Over the next week, the FBI team worked around the clock to build their case. They discovered that Heritage Hills Community Association was just one of 5 fake HOAs operating in Colorado, all connected to the same network of buyers and real estate investors. Agent Walsh showed me a map with red pins marking every property they'd targeted over the past 3 years. 67 homes, she said. Total estimated value of properties acquired below market rate, $12.8 million. The scope of the operation was staggering. They had perfected a system of legal intimidation that let them steal people's homes in broad daylight, using the legitimate-sounding authority of a homeowners association as cover. Maria had also discovered something particularly infuriating. "Dad, remember that Facebook post where they showed photos of your house and claimed you were violating community standards?" I nodded. The public shaming had been one of the most humiliating parts of the whole experience. Those photos were taken from inside your neighbor's yard without permission. We checked with Mrs. Henderson next door. She never gave them permission to enter her property, and she certainly didn't authorize them to use it as a platform for surveillance. So they were committing crimes, even while investigating crimes they'd made up. The audacity was breathtaking. 2 weeks after James Donovan's visit, Patricia called me again. Her voice was even sweeter than before, dripping with false concern. "Mr. Martinez, I wanted to check in on how you're feeling about James's offer. I know it's a big decision." I stayed in character. "I'm still thinking about it," I said. "It's just hard to let go of the house. My wife and I had so many plans for our retirement here." "Of course," she cooed. "But sometimes we have to be practical. And between you and me, the compliance issues on your property are only going to get more expensive to fix. We've had our Community Standards Committee do a full assessment, and there are several major violations that would require significant investment to correct." "What kind of violations?" I asked. "Well, the drainage issues in your backyard could require extensive landscaping work. The exterior trim work isn't up to current community standards. And we've identified some potential structural concerns with your front porch that would need to be addressed by a licensed contractor." None of this was true, of course. My house was in excellent condition, and I'd had it inspected just last year. But she was painting a picture of thousands of dollars in mandatory repairs, trying to make James's lowball offer seem reasonable. "How much would all these repairs cost?" I asked. "Oh, easily $30,000 to $40,000, she said without hesitation. "Maybe more, depending on what the contractors find. That's why James's offer is actually quite generous when you consider the work that needs to be done." I thanked her for the information and promised to make a decision soon. As soon as I hung up, I called Maria. "She just committed fraud again," Maria said with satisfaction. "Making false claims about property defects to manipulate a sale price. That's textbook wire fraud, and we have it all on tape." Agent Walsh decided it was time to spring the trap. "We're going to set up a controlled buy," she explained. "You're going to call James Donovan and tell him you're ready to accept his offer. But instead of a normal closing, we're going to arrange for the transaction to happen at your house, with all the key players present." The plan was sophisticated. I would tell James that I wanted to handle the sale privately, without involving traditional real estate agents or lawyers. This would appeal to criminals who wanted to avoid scrutiny. We would schedule the closing for a Saturday morning at my house, when they'd feel most comfortable and least suspicious. Meanwhile, the FBI would position surveillance teams throughout the neighborhood. When Patricia Donovan, James Donovan, and their associates arrived to complete what they thought was their successful theft of my property, they'd be walking into a carefully orchestrated arrest operation. "The beauty of this approach," Maria explained, "is that they'll bring all their fraudulent paperwork with them. They'll have to present the fake annexation documents, the fraudulent violation notices, and the contracts that prove the coordinated nature of their scheme." I made the call to James on Thursday. "I've decided to accept your offer," I told him. "But I'd prefer to handle this quietly at my house. I don't want the whole neighborhood watching while I pack up my life." He was practically salivating through the phone. "That's perfect, Mr. Martinez. I can bring all the paperwork on Saturday morning. We can take care of everything right there in your living room." "Should I have a lawyer present?" I asked, knowing what his answer would be. "Oh, that's not necessary," he said quickly. "This is a straightforward cash transaction. Having lawyers Involved would just slow things down and cost you money and fees. The trap was set. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold. I was nervous, but it was the good kind of nervous. The anticipation you feel when you know justice is finally coming. At exactly 10 o'clock, James Donovan pulled into my driveway, followed by a second car carrying Patricia and a man I didn't recognize. They walked up to my front door carrying briefcases and looking supremely confident. What they didn't see were the FBI agents positioned in unmarked cars throughout the neighborhood, the surveillance team in the van parked around the corner, or the fact that every word they were about to say would be recorded as evidence. I invited them into my living room, playing the part of the defeated homeowner one last time. Patricia looked around my house with the calculating eyes of someone appraising their conquest. "This really is a lovely home," she said with fake sympathy. "I'm sure it's difficult to let it go." James spread his paperwork across my coffee table, the same table where Elena and I used to do crossword puzzles together. "The good news," he said, "is that we can take care of all the outstanding HOA issues as part of the sale. You won't have to worry about any of those fines." The third man introduced himself as Greg Sullivan, supposedly a notary public who would handle the legal aspects of the transaction. He had a briefcase full of documents that would transfer ownership of my house to James's shell company for a fraction of its actual value. "Now," Patricia said, pulling out her own folder, "we do need to be clear about the community violations that make this property difficult to sell through normal channels." She began reading from a list that had grown even longer since our last conversation. Apparently, I was now in violation of community standards for the color of my mailbox flag, the height of my grass, and the type of doormat I used. "The total outstanding balance is now $38,467, she announced. "But as I mentioned, James is prepared to handle all of that." That's when I heard the cars. The sound started as a low rumble in the distance, like thunder on a clear day. Patricia, James, and Greg were so focused on their paperwork that they didn't notice it at first. But I did, and I had to fight to keep the smile off my face. 6 black SUVs turned onto my street in perfect formation, their engines synchronized and powerful. They moved with the coordinated precision of a federal law enforcement operation, which is exactly what they were. Patricia was the first to look up from her papers. "What's that noise?" she asked, a flicker of concern crossing her face. The SUVs pulled into my driveway and onto my front lawn, surrounding the house completely. 24 federal agents emerged simultaneously, their movements coordinated like a ballet of justice. James Donovan went pale. Greg Sullivan started shuffling his papers frantically, as if he could somehow hide the evidence of what they were doing. But Patricia just sat there, her mouth slightly open, as the full magnitude of her mistake became clear. The front door opened, and Maria walked in, no longer my daughter, but Special Agent Maria Martinez of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Behind her came Agent Walsh and 6 other agents, all wearing tactical vests with FBI printed in large yellow letters. "Patricia Donovan," Maria announced, her voice carrying the full authority of federal law enforcement. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit mail fraud, wire fraud, and civil rights violations under color of law." Patricia finally found her voice. "This is impossible," she stammered. "We're conducting legitimate HOA business. This is all legal." Agent Walsh stepped forward with a thick folder of evidence. "Ms. Donovan, we have 17 forged annexation documents, 43 fraudulent violation notices, recorded admissions of conspiracy, and financial records showing a 3-year pattern of property theft. Nothing about your operation is legal." As the handcuffs clicked around Patricia's wrists, the true scope of their operation began to unravel. James Donovan, faced with the choice between cooperation and decades in federal prison, immediately began talking. "It was all Patricia's idea," he said, his smooth confidence evaporating like morning mist. "She said HOAs had legal authority that was hard to challenge, especially if you filed the right paperwork. She said most people would just pay rather than fight." Greg Sullivan, the fake notary, turned out to be Patricia's brother-in-law. His briefcase contained blank notarization stamps and signature templates that could be used to forge property transfer documents. Agent Walsh explained to me later how the scheme worked. They'd identify target properties, usually homes owned by elderly or isolated individuals. Then they'd file fake annexation papers with the county, creating the legal fiction that these properties had joined their HOA. The county clerks, overwhelmed with paperwork and assuming that properly formatted documents were legitimate, would process the filings without investigation. Once the fake annexation was on file, Patricia and her team would begin their harassment campaign. They counted on people not knowing their rights, Maria added. Most homeowners don't understand that you can't be forced to join an HOA after you've already bought your property. They use that ignorance as a weapon. As the investigation expanded, the FBI discovered that Heritage Hills was just one tentacle of a much larger criminal organization. Patricia Donovan was part of a network that operated fake HOAs in 7 states, all using similar tactics to steal properties from vulnerable homeowners. The leader of the network was a man named Richard Kravitz, who had made millions by perfecting the art of legal intimidation. He would set up shell companies to create fake HOAs, recruit local accomplices like Patricia to run the day-to-day operations, then sit back and collect profits as stolen properties were flipped to legitimate buyers. Agent Walsh showed me a chart that looked like something from a mafia investigation. Lines connecting dozens of individuals across multiple states, money flowing through shell companies and fake contracting businesses, properties acquired through fraud and sold for enormous profits. Your case was the key that unlocked the whole thing, she told me. Because you had family in law enforcement, you didn't just pay up and disappear like most of their victims. You fought back, and that gave us the opening we needed. The FBI arrested 47 people across 7 states in what they called Operation Clean Sweep. Patricia Donovan, James Donovan, Greg Sullivan, and 15 other members of the Colorado operation were charged with federal crimes carrying sentences of up to 20 years in prison. The trial was a media sensation. Local news stations picked up the story of the fake HOA that had targeted dozens of families, and suddenly I found myself in the uncomfortable position of being a public figure. But the attention served a purpose. Other victims came forward. People who had been bullied into selling their homes or paying fraudulent fines. The prosecution's case grew stronger with each new witness. Patricia Donovan's defense strategy was to claim that she genuinely believed she had legal authority to enforce HOA rules. Her lawyer argued that any mistakes were honest errors in judgment, not criminal intent. The prosecution, led by my nephew David, systematically demolished that defense. They presented the forged documents, the recorded phone calls, the financial evidence of the coordinated scheme. Most damaging of all, they played recordings of Patricia's phone calls where she explicitly discussed targeting easy marks and old people who won't fight back. When Maria took the witness stand to explain how the investigation had started, I felt a surge of pride, watching my daughter calmly and professionally describe how she'd uncovered a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy that had started with a fake violation notice on her father's door. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Patricia Donovan was found guilty on all counts. James Donovan pled guilty and received a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation. Greg Sullivan was convicted of racketeering and document fraud. The judge's sentencing was swift and harsh. Patricia received 15 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay restitution to all the families her organization had victimized. The total amount exceeded $4 million. In the months that followed the trial, Colorado passed new legislation requiring additional oversight of HOA formation and annexation processes. The Martinez Law, as it became known, mandated that any attempt to annex existing properties into an HOA required certified mail notification to all affected homeowners and a waiting period for legal challenges. My neighbors who had been victims of Heritage Hills began receiving restitution checks. Bill got back the $5,000 he'd paid in fraudulent fines. Cheryl received compensation for the emotional distress of being harassed over her welcome mat. More importantly, the investigation led to the discovery of dozens of other victims across the state. Families who had lost their homes, elderly people who had been frightened into paying thousands of dollars in fake fines, veterans